Hello and welcome back to my channel. If you're new, welcome to my channel. Today I want to show you a technique for aging and distressing your artwork. I really love watching those art restoration videos on YouTube where they just like scrape away years and years of gunk and dirt and yellowing off of a painting to reveal what it once looked like. I find myself still really liking the original like dirty painting. I think it gives the art a lot of character and like a different tone to it. Especially with new artwork, you can kind of make it have a different message by making it look old. So I wanted to replicate that and show you guys a way to take a new painting that you made today or yesterday and make it look like it's been aging for hundreds and hundreds of years. Before you start, you're going to want to get your artwork prepped. If you're doing this effect on a water-based painting like watercolor or gouache, or any drawing with loose particles like charcoal, make sure that the surface of your artwork is sealed with a spray varnish and it's completely dry. Oil paintings and acrylic paintings, you should be good to go. Here are the materials you're going to need. You will need a gloss varnish. You can also use a matte varnish. This crackle glaze, I'll leave a link to where I got mine in the description. Some paper towels, a sponge, acrylic paints in raw sienna and burnt umber, some paintbrushes, and then if you're going to be distressing your painting, you'll also need a palette knife and an X-Acto knife. I also recommend some sandpaper too. I couldn't find mine, so I just used an old nail file. This effect is going to work best on a canvas surface just because there's going to be more texture there. Alright, so let's get started. The first thing that I'm doing is mixing up a bit of my acrylic paints with that clear varnish. So I'm using the raw sienna color and just adding a tiny bit of it into that gloss varnish. I'm brushing all over the canvas with this. You just want to create kind of a yellowed glaze to it. In some areas I'm going in and adding a little bit extra yellowing, so kind of wherever you want really, it's up to you. You can also thin out the paint with water instead of the glaze. I find the glaze works a little bit better, but you can kind of experiment and play with it a little bit. I left my first glaze of yellow out to dry and made sure that was completely dry before moving on to the next step. Next, I'm applying a layer of that crackle glaze, and I applied a pretty thick layer to this painting, and I would advise you to play a little bit with it before you put it on the painting that you're going to be using. The first time I used it, I put it on pretty thin and I got a more even layer and it had a pretty good effect. There weren't crackles in every single spot, so with this one I did a pretty thick layer and I kind of let the brush strokes stay to create a little bit more texture. Looking back, I wish I would have went with a little bit thinner layer of this glaze because it did get pretty thick and it didn't really smooth out. On the instructions for it, it says that you don't really have to smooth it out, that it'll kind of smoothen out on its own, but it doesn't exactly do that, so definitely experiment with this before you put it on your final piece. After I applied my crackle glaze, I let that sit out and dry for probably about 45 minutes. I think I waited maybe an hour because it was pretty thick. You're going to want to make sure it's completely dry before moving on to the next step. I'm going to get out my acrylic colors again, so that burnt umber and the raw sienna, and I'm taking the burnt umber, I'm mixing a little bit of them both together and creating just kind of a dark brown, and then I'm just brushing this over the light surfaces of my painting. To do this effect, I recommend getting one light color and one dark color, and brushing the dark color in the cracks over the light parts, and then brushing the light color in the cracks over the dark parts. That way you can really see the effect of the crackle over the entire painting. If you just do it with like a dark color, let's say, you probably won't be able to see it as well over the black, and if you did it with the light, you wouldn't be able to see it as well over the light part. So what I'm doing is rubbing in the paint into the cracks and then brushing over the surface to clean that off. So I'm not just putting paint all over the surface and covering up my work. I kind of think of this like if you were laying down tiles, so when you're putting in the grout, you like slap it all over the place and then you just clean off the top. That's basically what I'm doing because I want the color to sit in the cracks of that glaze. I'm basically just repeating this over and over until I feel like there's a good color buildup inside the cracks. And then I'm also brushing off the surface of my painting with some paper towel too, just because my sponge is getting a little dirty. I went in with a little bit more of the dark colors and just really built up that color, so there were going to be some areas that were really, really dirty looking. So basically keep going with that technique until you are happy with how much pigment is stuck between those cracks. It'll really show off how much that layer has added texture. When I do a close-up shot, it's a little bit hard to see on those darker spots because there's quite a bit of glare outside. So I let that sit out in the sun for a while until that was completely dry. Some of those areas where it looks a little cloudy cleared up after it was completely dried. Now I'm moving on to distressing my painting. I really like the distressed look. You can totally skip this step if you want. I'm basically just having fun with it. I'm going in with that nail file, use sandpaper if you have it, and just scratching up some of the surfaces and then kind of just wiping it off with my sponge so it's not cloudy and there's not any debris stuck to the surface. And then I'm using my palette knife to kind of scrape off that top layer of the glaze, and I'm also using my X-Acto knife to scrape off that layer. And I'm kind of experimenting with how much to do, so in some areas I'm completely scraping down to the canvas of the painting, so even peeling off some of that paint, and then in some areas I'm just scraping off the glaze. So have fun with it, experiment. After I have the amount of distress that I want on my painting, I'm going in and adding more of the yellow and brown colors using either a little bit of water or some of that clear glaze to dilute it a little bit. I'm just going over some areas and then going over those areas where I distressed as well. So that is what the surface of the painting looks like when I'm all done with the distressing and the layers. You can pretty much keep going until you get the effect that you're going for. So in case you forgot, here's what the original painting looked like. And here is the final product. I had a lot of fun doing this. It's kind of a time-consuming process because there's a lot of waiting for things to dry and a lot of layers, but it's definitely worth it if you really like the look of the old, worn-out paintings. You can really experiment with this technique a lot and kind of make it your own. You can really distress a painting a lot and make it look really grungy and really gross, or you can just do a little bit. It's really up to you. I would love to see what you make. If you do use this technique on your own art, you can tag me on Instagram or Twitter. I'm at AmberMarsArt on both of those. Thank you so much for watching. I look forward to seeing your creations.